Obeisance to you all. And I welcome you all for today's presentation and welcome also our guest speaker, Her Grace Aruddha Devi Prabhu. I'm going to read her bio, what he sent to me. It reads like this: Aruddha Devi Dasi and husband Anantarupa Das started a temple in Boise, Idaho, USA in 1986 as a small weekly program in their home. Actually started in their home. Now, 30 years later, there is a beautiful Vedic temple for Shri Radha Banki Bihari. They homeschooled their two sons, Gopal Hari and Radhika Raman, using a curriculum based on Srimad-Bhagavatam, translated by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Both of them completed their PhD from Oxford University in England at the age of 21. Can you imagine that? Aruddha has been traveling around the world doing seminars on the art of Krishna conscious parenting and how to teach Srimad Bhagavatam to children. She is the author of Homeschooling Krishna's Children. She is the author of the book Homeschooling Krishna's Children, published by BBT. This book provides a complete guide to Krishna conscious parenting. With a team of parents around the world, she has been working on Srimad Bhagavatam guide books for children. These guides provide children, parents, and teachers with a delightful way to study Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavatam chapter by chapter. There are chapter summaries, key themes, analogies, critical thinking activities, and character descriptions with the aim of cultivating in our children a lifelong love for reading Srimad Bhagavatam. Srimad Bhagavatam, a comprehensive guide for young readers, Canto 1, 2, 3, and 4 are completed and currently available on Amazon. She is now working on Canto 5. Although I read this, I think there's a lot more to say about her, but in the interest of saving time, giving her more time, I would pass it on to her with the request. Hopefully, she will also tell her, time permitting, how she came upon this idea of doing it, this homeschooling. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you, Guru Prasad Prabhu. You've for putting this together. I know you really worked hard on putting this seminar together. Thank you for your nice service. And I'm really happy to be with all of you today. Really excited, actually. So I have not been to Toronto as yet. I've been to Vancouver several times, but not to Toronto. Maybe one day. I've heard so much about that temple over there. So all of you wonderful devotees. So I will begin with the seminar. And just to let you know, the seminar will be divided into 3 parts. One, and it's based on the ISKCON motto, which is purity is the force, right? And then books are the basis, preaching is the essence. So these are the 3, and there's one more, utility is the principle. Okay. So the seminar will be focused on the first 3 of this motto. Okay. So yeah, and this seminar is really designed for anybody, whether you're homeschooling or not homeschooling, whether you're sending your child to school, even though I personally homeschooled my children, but the principles are the same. What I'm going to present to you are just the basic principles of what it makes to bring a nice child, just based on my own experience and the experience of other people, other devotees, is some tried out methods of what it takes to build up, to bring up children in Krishna consciousness. As we know today, the world things have changed so much, isn't it, in the world? Just 20 years ago, the biggest problem in school was chewing gum. And that problem is long gone away, right? It's not even considered a problem, right? But now we have problems, so many other problems, right? serious problems, drugs and shooting. At least in America, there's so much shooting. I know in Canada it's so much better. But things have changed so much. So that's why so many parents, they want to homeschool. And even if they don't want to homeschool, they're very, very conscientious about the fact that they need to put some more time and energy into their children's upbringing. So I will begin, and with the way I'm going to present to you is I'm going to cover the first section and then open it for questions for about 10-15 minutes, whatever it takes, and then I'll begin the next section, open it for questions, then the third section, and open it for questions. And then if there's more questions, I'll take that. I'll try to make the presentation rather small, because in this way I can give more time for questions, and that's really where the heart is. I want to hear from you and your challenges in raising children and make it quite interactive, okay? So I'll begin with my own presentation, give you a real quick overview of what are the basic principles in Krishna conscious parenting, based, like I said, on my experience and the experience of other parents, and then move from there, okay? So I'm going to be sharing the screen with you, and these are slides that I've prepared to highlight some of the basic principles.
શું કપડા કપડા પછી અમે પહેલા આ કર.
Or I'm not able to. Just a minute, Prabhu. I'm having a little bit of a problem. Yeah. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. Some technical problems here. Okay. So this is a very, everybody can see me. Yeah. I mean, see this screen share. Yeah. Okay. So this is a very nice quote by Srila Prabhupada, and I want to begin the seminar by reading to you this beautiful quote by Srila Prabhupada. If we train children by developing and encouraging their propensity to love Krishna, then we shall be successful in educating them to the topmost standard. Then they shall happily agree to do whatever you ask them. So this is a very nice quote. In other words, Prabhupada is saying that if we make our children into devotees, that is topmost education, okay? It's not anything separate. It's not like, okay, if we raise them in Krishna consciousness, then we still have to worry about so many other things. Why is he saying that? It's because when we hear and learn about Krishna, Krishna being the source of everything, both material and spiritual, naturally we develop knowledge for everything, whatever is there, right? Because Krishna is the source of all knowledge. And also Prabhupada gave us a whole world, in which everybody could live. Right? And within Krishna consciousness, there's so many things which help the child, get that education. Also, he gave us the facility, He gave us the spiritual, he gave us the material and spiritual assets by which we can raise our children. It's not like Prabhupada just said it. He built an institution in which if we raise them as nice devotees, they actually do get good education, right? Of course, we may have to, send them to school or do those things in order to give them a decent education. However, by not giving them Krishna consciousness, we will be putting the odds too much against them, because this is where the real heart of education is. Okay. So this is my own little personal journey of how I started Krishna consciousness and how I introduced my children to Krishna consciousness. So these are the deities in Boise that we have. Radha Bhakya Vihari we have a mid-sized temple here that we started some 30 years ago, and by Prabhupada's mercy. So when we first came here to Boise, there was no temple and there was no devotee association. So we realized if we want some association, we have to create one. So we started a little preaching center, and we opened our home. Basically, it was a little room. It was a little family room in our own home, and we opened it for people. And I was very close to Boise State University, probably a block or 2 blocks away. And so I started going there and distributing some cards, so that inviting people to come. So gradually people came and they learned about Krishna consciousness, and this way we got some association. And when my children, they turned 5, then I started thinking about the school, what to do now. And I, like any other parent, I was very, I thought, well, school is the only way, because I had not heard about homeschooling. So I put them in a private school, and I started to volunteer time there just to learn what they were doing, just to see, what was going on. And it was very fruitful, because when I went there, then I saw certain things that I actually didn't really like. And so I became dissatisfied. Mostly I was dissatisfied because when children go to school and for 8 hours a day, and when they come home, they're tired. And I wanted to do so many wonderful things with them. I wanted to teach them from a book. I wanted to teach them musical instruments. And I felt like they were really, really tired by the time they came home. And it was really like a struggle to take them from the devotional frame of mind into from the outside frame of mind to a devotional frame of mind. And so when I started experiencing those troubles, and also, of course, I saw things in them that I really didn't care about. As you all know, I'm sure all of your children are going there. And sometimes as devotees, it's a real struggle to try to take them away from that consciousness. And we try our best, So similarly, I was facing those very similar problems, and also I noticed academically, it was not that satisfying, because one time I sat in my son's math class, and I noticed that he had finished his work like maybe 20 minutes early, and he was just sitting there bored. And so I realized that actually public schools or private schools, they are really meant for the average. If your child is above average, so he's pretty much not challenged, he's bored. And if he's below average, then he's kind of, he's kind of left behind. So it's really for the average. And then morally also, I felt like it was lacking, because even though he was in a private school, one time for my younger son, Gopal, when he was in his classroom, he came home and he told me that, before class, there was his class teacher, her boyfriend came, and they were, like lightly kissing each other in front of all the kids. And I felt, well, all these values, that they learn is just not very conducive for the spiritual life, right? Prabhupada said that in order to teach a teacher must be somebody who follows the 4 regulative principles. Basically, you know, the 4 regulative principles that we have: no meat eating, no illicit sex, no intoxication, gambling. In other words, a teacher must have character, okay? Because it's very hard, because one teaches by example, right? This is more, example is more powerful than just theoretical learning, right? What we learn from seeing somebody's example is far more effective. And so if a teacher is not following these basic principles in life, then it's very hard for children to actually get that good example, right? So, and I noticed that, you know, like just hearing from my children and the experience. Luckily, we had a very open communication, and they would come and tell what was going on in school. So it was disappointing, to say the least, right? So I realized that let me see if there's an alternative way to study. Now you have to, you know, my children are now older, and if this was like 25 years ago, and you know, and I realized that at that time, homeschooling was not, it was already here in America. People were practicing, but it wasn't so popular as it is today. America now is quite popular, actually. And most of these people who are doing homeschooling are coming from nice family with values, and mostly they're Christian families. So anyway, so I started investigating into that idea, and I thought, well, what I'll do is during summer, I'll try it out, you know, for 3 months, because we get 3 months break. And if it works, it works. Otherwise, I'll send them back to school. So, and I bought a curriculum. Here in America, you can buy a curriculum for the whole year. And so I bought a curriculum, and I thought, let me try. And you won't believe it, but within the span of 3 years, they had finished the entire curriculum. And we weren't studying too much. It was very, quite minimal, actually, maybe 1 or 2 hours, 2 hours a day. And I realized that actually it's doable. I can do it. If I have a curriculum, and if I, you know, I can, there's so many, there are others who are doing it, why not? So that's when I got the courage, and I started homeschooling my children. And then as we went along following the curriculum, I realized the curriculum had limitations, because if your child is above average, above that grade level in math, then you're stuck with that book. So I thought, well, let me just not buy a curriculum, let me find books that are at his level. So I started out like that. And then gradually I was inspired to actually, you know, follow the devotional way of teaching. In other words, I saw the value of Prabhupada's books, like especially Srimad-Bhagavatam, and the richness that's in these books in terms of both academically and spiritually. And so I decided to give up that style and take up this process where I taught them all language and everything through the Srimad-Bhagavatam. And of course, I had math books and things like that. But more about this later. It's just that I wanted to give you a little journey of my own experience. And of course, when my children grew up and they went to college, I started seeing the results of such education, and I started sharing it with others. And I started doing many, many seminars to give devotees the confidence that actually this is a wonderful path, whether you're following a curriculum and teaching on the Bhagavatam on a side, or you're full out on teaching all types of language skills from the Bhagavatam. Either way, it's a win-win situation. And then I started also sharing with them that if your children were to go to school, then how you can still follow these principles. So this is my humble presentation, and I'm going to continue here. So this first section of the presentation is purity is the force, which means what can we do what are some of the things we can do in our own house to raise a Krishna conscious child? And what are some of the things that we should avoid? So let's go begin with what are the things that we should avoid. Is always more exciting, isn't it? So one of the things that's very, very detrimental, and I'm sure all of you would agree with me, right? There's so much innovation on these things, especially television and of course internet, which is another form of, even a more sophisticated form of television, right? So what is wrong with these things, both of these things, is that there are two problems. One is the content and the other one is the medium. So nobody will, argue with me on the content, right? Because we all know that television is full with things that we as devotees try to avoid, isn't it? Those very four things that we are trying so hard to follow, the four basic principles: no meat eating, no illicit sex, no gambling, and no intoxication. These are the very things that are encouraged when we see television, right? Especially with commercials and of course even regular shows, right? So the problem with content is that those very principles that we devotees are trying so hard to follow, they are broken when we watch television and internet. So and sometimes people say that, well, what about the good shows, right? I'm sure you also have those questions, right? What about the good shows? Well, for example, in America, there's a channel called the Discovery Channel. Basically, it's a nice channel with all the good stuff, educational things about the geography, about the world and things like that. But the problem with that is that there's so many commercials, and also the problem with this medium is that it's so addictive that it's hard to turn off, right? I'm sure you've noticed that, right? Now with internet and things like that, it's so difficult to turn off. So it leads to addiction. In other words, if you watch even a little bit, it leads to more and more watching. Which child wants to stop when it's finished? It's just the medium. It's the way it's so powerful, because whatever, and what to speak of a child, his reality becomes this world. Because for a child, when he watches something, he thinks this is what reality is. For him, that's reality. It's very hard for them to separate. And then the medium. The problem with the medium is that television and internet is something that is a one-way download from the brain to the tube. It's a one-way download. In other words, there is no interaction. So with the result that there's no activity in the brain, there's no critical thinking. So they've done research that when one watches, then there's the brain activity is practically zero. It's practically zero. So what happens is the brain becomes mentally lazy. And once it becomes mentally lazy, it's very hard to exercise the brain for challenging things, for critical thinking things, or for math. That's why there's research that children who watch a lot of, who are exposed to this media, then they struggle through these skills, like math skills and other skills that require critical thinking. So it's very difficult for them. So in this way, for example, okay, there's somebody wants to mute that. Should we mute that, Prabhu? Maybe Bhaktamil.
Yes. Let me mute the devotees. Sorry for that. Let me mute them.
Yeah, when I open it for questions, you can unmute them. Yeah.
Suguna Anand Prabhu is talking. Yeah, let me mute him.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes. So, for example, I'll tell you one wonderful an example which will highlight that is that if you're reading from a book, okay, so you have to first decode the words, and then you have to build a picture in your mind as to what's going on. Suppose there's a beautiful description of a nice forest scene. So not only have you to decode the words, but you have to build an image, right? A creative image. Oh, this is how it must look like. So you are using your mind and your brain, right, to create that image. Even when you hear from the radio, well, you may not have to decode the words, but you still have to imagine, right? There's creativity involved in it. But when we watch television, both of these things are not there, right? You don't have to decode the words, and you don't have to create an image. Why? Because everything is given to you. Everything is given to you. So it's very, very detrimental in a child's critical thinking and also in developing good mental skills. Okay, so that's the contents, the medium side. So what to do now? What to do? So we have to, and especially video games, especially, as you know, is very, very addictive. So internet is also very detrimental. It's just very, very addictive. As you know, there's something called internet addiction, which is it's become a real problem, at least in America. Anybody over 12 is online every day, practically, and they're addicted to, especially social media, as you know. So many different types, Facebook and Twitter and all these things. And the problem with that is that they build their identity through these things. So they're lacking, due to that, they lack social skills because they're not communicating physically with people. So their skills for building up relationships is poor at that point. As you know, if you walk with somebody, I've experienced that. You're walking along with somebody, and you are talking, and suddenly, if there's a lull in that conversation, then you notice how people don't know how to fill up that conversation, and they pull out their phones and they start punching, right? So why? Because they have, in this age of this media, people have, they have very poor communication skills. They don't know how to relate with people. And a child growing up with this bombardment, it also manifests in their relationships with other devotees, because they have not developed the skills of how to actually have personal relationships with one another, based on face-to-face mingling and interaction. Everything has become through this media. So it's children like that growing up in Kṛiṣhṇa, they become very social misfits, and they become very alienated. In America today, it's become a huge problem, actually, and suicide rates due to this, due to constant social media bombardment, have gone up. Have gone up in schools. It's become a huge problem, and actually, children who are also claiming that and are noticing that this is why they are suffering so much, and they actually wish that they were not exposed to these smartphones and this media from early on. They can see the detrimental effects on them. Of course, it leads to depression. They've done research that it releases hormones which are very bad in terms of in terms of addiction, in terms of self-harm, and so many other problems. So what to do with it? Well, one may argue that, well, how can you avoid this? Because nowadays, at least in America, they have internet in schools. You have to go on the internet, do your homework and so many things, especially with COVID now, everything, this online schooling. So children are forced to use the internet at all times. So what to do with it? So the example is that if there is just like a tool, for example, a hammer. When you have a hammer, then you use it for hammering, right? To putting a nail inside. But you don't take that hammer and you don't carry it around. You don't carry it around or have a relationship with the hammer. Rather, you keep it away. You use it like a tool. Your work is done and you keep it away. Same thing with the internet. We have to do something. We have to use it for emails and looking up some important statistics. But then when the work is done, we turn it off. This always mode on mode is not good, because it encourages to be browsing, for long hours, right? So for children, if they have to do work on the internet, you keep it limited. They should keep it limited with the help of the parents and understand that they have to turn it off. That's basically how we can help them to limit internet. And of course, television, we don't even need that. My children never even grew up with television, and they never even missed it. And if they were exposed to people who were watching it didn't have that great an effect, because they developed higher taste. There was so much in Krishna consciousness, so many things to involve them, that they were always busy. In fact, if you ask them what was homeschooling like, they remember that it was one big play for them, one big play. They can't remember any time where it was a drudgery for them. So in this way, we can involve them in so many Krishna conscious activities and make and interact with them. And in this way, they will not find the necessity to be on television or the internet. So this is, I'll go through some of these things quite quickly, these topics. So morning program is such a wonderful way to start the day, right? Prabhupada actually didn't want any austerities for our children, except the austerity of, doing something in the morning. He said they can eat as much as they like, they can play around. They're children, right? But he said there's some austerities that he wanted. And that's why, as you know, in Gurukula, children are always getting up early morning and following a morning program for devotees, as you know what they are, and so he was very much in favor of that. Why? Because it makes the mind very peaceful. It cleans our mind and our body. And a lot of, you won't believe that, but a lot of the behavior problems that we see in our children, they go away because of this, of interacting in this morning program and chanting and dancing. Is such a powerful way to make it, to raise our children and to make them peaceful. And also when they do a morning program, then they're actually ready to face the world, right? It's like a shield. It builds up around you. And the same thing with adults, right? When they start the day, okay, they can handle this world because it helps them, it protects them. Of course, with children, it may be, we need to make it very flexible. We cannot make it very long because children cannot, stay through that very long ones. But especially if they're going to school, otherwise it can be a bit longer, right? So we can make it very short. We can make it flexible. The other part is the japa. A lot of you may have questions on japa because, japa is something is very, very tough to introduce our children to it because it's something they don't want to do, right? So my recommendation would be not to force them, but rather to show by example. In other words, chant with them, even if it's one round, when they sit down to do japa, you do it with them. Don't let them do it alone. Because they develop bad habits, and also they think like boring or drudgery, it's like so in other words, and Prabhupada said two very important things about introducing children to japa. And one is that we should not use it as a punishment. In other words, we should not tell them that, oh, you've been a bad boy today, so you must chant 1 round. Or we should not use it as a reward either, that you were such a good child, now you can, because you chanted 1 round, you can get an ice cream, like that. Japa in itself is a connection with Krishna and should be encouraged among children, not forced. Gradually we can encourage by one example, but the example of other devotees, and gradually they can build it up. Make it an enjoyable experience. Chant with them. And gradually, as they get a taste for it, one day you'll be surprised and they will want to chant 16 rounds and take shelter with spiritual master. So prasadam, try to eat only prasadam. Why? Because it's amazing, but like there's a saying here, that we are what we eat. In other words, food has a great way of affecting our consciousness. It is one thing that affects the soul really hits the soul very strongly. Why? Because it's just something. So in other words, just like an artist, when you see a painting by an artist, and if it's all modern art and very, bold colors and everything, immediately you see the effect on the mind, right? But if it's a peaceful scenario with nice, wonderful, nice peaceful atmosphere, lake and a boat, like that, immediately the mind feels peaceful, right? So same thing with food is, if it's been cooked by somebody whose consciousness is very disturbed and is violent, then naturally it's going to affect us. It's very natural. It's going to affect us, right? But food that's cooked by devotees is naturally going to have an effect, the effect the other way, right? So, for example, Lord Chaitanya, he brought the chanting of the holy name and prasadam, two very important weapons. That was his weapon. He didn't come to annihilate demons, right? Like Krishna did. Krishna came to annihilate demons, but not Lord Chaitanya. His weapon was prasadam and chanting of the holy name, because he knew that would clean our hearts. That would clean our hearts and make us into saints. Make us into saints. And we know that, right, from our own experience, that you may be talking all types of philosophy to somebody, but you give him a plate of prasadam and immediately he changes, right? No matter how much you've been trying to tell him and preach to him. Prasadam has such a great effect. Now, the practical aspect, what do we do with children? They want to eat this and that. Well, try your level best. Now, initially, it may happen that we may have to cook more, but as children get older, they are quite satisfied because they have other interests that take over, right? So we may have to do more, but it's well worth it, because when the children grow up and go into the world, then these habits will be they'll be so thankful for these habits. It'll carry on in their life. They will not want to eat outside food, They will not want to eat that food because they have already developed a taste for prasadam. And if you've been eating prasadam and you go out and you eat karmi food, you know the difference, right? It just feels very different, right? So this is the habits that they develop. So yes, we may have to work a little bit, but these things pay off as children get older and they actually move into their own life. And of course, there's challenges even now with children eating prasadam. They may go to somebody's house, a devotee's house, and they may be eating things from outside. So what to do? Well, children, if they are trained well, and that's why this whole seminar is a package, where these are the practical ways, but then we will be talking about studying scriptures, studying Srimad-Bhagavatam, which provides food for the intelligence, wherein we understand why we are devotees and why we don't do things. So both have to go together, the practical aspect, but also the theoretical part, where a child understands his intelligence is, we cater to the intelligence which tells them why they don't eat outside food, why they avoid, why they're devotees. So both have to come together so that children are well situated. So in terms of outside parties and things, I also struggle with that in terms of if they're going to school and they have children who are inviting them, so it's very important that we set the standards right from day one. If you set the standards from day one, then people respect you for that. But if you keep changing them, we become a laughing stock, right? So we set the standard. Okay, this is we not only don't eat meat, but we also don't eat in kitchens that cook meat. In other words, so this helps in avoiding, those, in trying to explain to people why we cannot eat with them in their house, which has food which is totally vegetarian. And they will say, well, it's all vegetarian. Why you cannot eat this? It's because we don't eat food that's been cooked in a kitchen that cooks meat. Okay. Now, initially, it may be difficult, but once the standards are set, then people will respect you for it. And we followed that, and it was not very difficult. And my husband followed it when he went to work, and he had to have lunch with other colleagues. My sons, when they went to Oxford, to study, they follow that. So it's just this, we have to set the standard. So a little struggle initially, but you will be so much happier if you did that. The good association, Prabhupada said that, children, he gave the example of the story of Tarzan. How Tarzan grew up with monkeys, so he developed the habits of monkeys, right? So we have to give good association not only to ourselves, but to our children as well, because they develop, this is especially children growing up, like the first 5 years, they will want to imitate everyone that they see in front of them, right? Especially those very special people who are in their life constantly, they want to imitate them. So we have to give them, and in other words, they're looking for good role models. We want good role models for them, right? So children are innocent, for example, Prabhupada said that they don't grow up smoking and drinking, right? They develop by habit, by association. So in the same way, if we give them good association, naturally they will develop good habits. And these associations can be given in so many different ways. That is, one is, especially through a good adult association, we can give them. And of course, good devotee children association. Prabhupada said that children need their friends and they need to frolic and play, but he stressed adult association more than over peer association, because the children, through good adult association, they learn responsibility. Today, you see how among young people, young children, young teenagers, we see how it's a huge problem. There's such a big generation gap between the parents, between the adults and the children. And the children don't relate at all with the adults. They have their own dress. They're like their own species, right? They have their own dress, their own music, their own food, their own language, right? And what is the result of such separation with the adults is that the children don't learn responsibility. And we should not be surprised. We should not be surprised. So Prabhupada stressed good adult association. And it begins with associating with adults, devotees who are chanting and dancing, right? In the morning program, we come together, chanting and dancing. And you see how in devotional life, children, there's not so much generation gap because we have the same music, we have the same food, right? We have the same activities. We have everything. And so the children feel very much part of our life, and they feel, and they're more settled, they're more happier in this way. So we should be try to give them that, and that can be through our own association, through the association of other devotees, through the association of gurus and sannyasis, right, who have such a great impact in their lives. Even a moment's association with these such people goes a long way in framing, in developing their life, right? We all know that, and we should try to take advantage of that and give them that association. When my younger son was just finished college, undergraduate, he took a year off and traveled with his Guru Maharaj. And it was such an important time where he learned so many things. That association with him was so valuable, and with other devotees. So sometimes we have to take steps like that in our life, where we may think, oh my gosh, how can I waste this time? But it's not a wastage, because this is the time where they actually need, this, the mind is looking for answers. They're looking for answers. They see something else in school, and they see something else at home. And there's a huge conflict. So by giving them more of this association, the mind becomes, there's less conflict in their life. And also they see themselves more as devotees. And of course, we have Sunday school, plays, festival, activities, all these things. So this one in this section, the last one is deity worship. And this deity worship really is important for our children, because it's, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, there's a beautiful quote by him. He says, religions that don't have any form of deity worship, children who are raised in that, they may end up becoming very materialistic and atheistic also. Why? Because there's no form of the Lord on which they can focus their mind. So we see how when we have deities, then how the child can, and we can actually focus on the form of the Lord. And in this way, we develop a personal relationship with Krishna, right? A personal relationship. Why? Because we have a form, and we actually, learn how to worship that form. So there's a personal relationship that develops between Krishna and us. And this relationship is so important, because this becomes the basis for good Vaishnava relationships as well. So this becomes a focus of good Vaishnava relationships. Why? Because through that, we understand that how everybody is a person. We realize that in the world today, there's so much impersonalism. There's so much, everything, of course, with media, everything is just, we'd rather communicate on that personal level, right? And so with the result that we are getting more and more isolated, and we start thinking of the world as very impersonal. We have lost, feeling for others, right? In this way. So by developing this, it begins with Krishna, when we develop this foundation of developing a personal relationship with Krishna, then we become very happy and satisfied. And of course, what to speak of other side benefits that come with it, where the children learn this, limits to how we can interact with Krishna. In other words, Krishna, even though he's my friend, he's a person, yet there is, we have to establish borders, right? Where we know that we need to be clean and try to be punctual as much as we can. Of course, in household life, it's very difficult, and Krishna understands. And how we must offer everything to Krishna, especially food, also, because we can teach. It becomes a nice platform to teach our children to offer everything. We can engage them in offering everything that they eat. And it's so nice, because you'll see how they will lead you in that mood. So this is, I just ended my first section of the seminar And I would like to open it for questions, if anybody has any questions.
Hare Krishna, dear devotees, especially parents. This is organized specifically for your and your children's interest. If you have any question, please ask, because towards the end, if you're bringing too many questions, it may be difficult to cover all of them. All right, I have one question. You said the three principles, except for the utilities, the principle. Apart from that, you're going to cover. So this is the first one, books are the basis, or is the next one?
Yeah, this is the second one.
Or the
Yeah,
second one.
so let me cover all the three. I'll open it for questions after this as well. And if there's no question, I'll just cover go through the whole, all the sections and then open it for questions. You know.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, Prabhu?
Please go ahead.
Hare Krishna Mataji. Can I ask a
So,
question?
yes, of course.
I'm
Yes.
sorry. Let me turn on my
No,
camera.
no, this is good.
So just question about media and internet and TV. Could you give some advice, practical advice maybe, for those parents who already have this situation? I mean, we don't have TV, but internet is obviously, I'm working as IT engineer, and children can see that I'm not all the time, but during the day I'm at the computer and they kind of see it, and I can't tell them don't use internet, right? So maybe something practical that we can
Yes, Prabhu.
Yeah.
So a very good question and a very practical question. Like I suggested earlier, that the point is to train them to use it for whatever is needed and then to turn it off, mainly. It's the habit of turning off when they don't need it. In other words, as parents, we should supervise, what they are watching. In other words, as we know, there's so much of internet which is trash, right? So much of it is trash. There are two problems with that. One is the source. We know that the source is questionable. Where the information is coming from, we don't know, right? And as devotees, that's the first thing we look for, is the source, and then the content. So if the source is good, then we know that the content will be good, right? The problem with internet is we don't know the source. As you know, there may be a website today and tomorrow it may disappear, right? It's just very ephemeral, the whole process, right? So therefore, we have to see what they're watching, what is the source of their information? What are they watching, right? And also we have to be careful, like in television, you can at least limit the number of channels children can watch, right? But internet, there's no good way of limiting, right? So we don't know what they're watching. They may be watching, they may be accidentally, they may not be doing it purposely, but we know a lot of internet is pornography. And they may come to that. They may, accidentally, they may come a lot in that site, which is really bad, right? And this happens in America, at least. They've done statistics that most of the children who are exposed to these things have come into it accidentally. It's just 2 clicks away, right? So in other words, we have to watch for these things as parents. We have a responsibility. Yes, we cannot completely ban them from all these things because it's just become part of our life, you cannot avoid. But yet, we should establish clear borderlines, clear rules, and we should not be afraid of following them. I talk to so many parents who are actually, they don't want to do anything, like they are afraid of actually doing anything that, limiting them, because they feel so much of pressure from their peers, like how they're going to handle in school, their friends, and, they'll feel misfits, so many of that, and they kind of give in to those things, right? So, but we as devotee parents, we should establish clear, limitations, clear restrictions on what they can watch and what they cannot watch, and try to avoid smartphones for them till as long as we can avoid. In other words, we shouldn't be very eager to give them smartphones as soon as they turn 11 or 10, That's what at least parents do over here. What is the big, why the big hurry? If they need phones, there's other flip phones, right, that they can use to call and things like that. And like I said, initially it may be hard, but then really, they will be thankful, and they will understand, eventually. The earlier you have these, these rules, the better it is. You just have to do it. It's such a detrimental part of their life. It can destroy everything practically, whatever you're trying to do with them. So we should have clear instructions for them as to what they can, how much time they can spend, and what they're watching, so at least we can do that part, and they can understand, okay, this is here for when I need to work, but yet it's not here for me as an entertainment. Well, I don't know if this answered your question or if you had any further questions for this.
Oh, thank you. Well, I understand. We need to set borders and supervise. Thank you.
Yes, yes.
We have Sandeep Prabhu. He raised the hand. So
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna, Mataji.
Hare
I'm
Krishna.
Sandeep here. I just have a question in terms of, are you gonna give any kind of the process-wise how this homeschooling needs to be enabled or facilitated, and any practical experiences that you have as part of this transition journey?
Yes, Prabhu, I can do that. A lot of your questions may be answered in this section. Books are the basis. It will help you. But also, I can also, towards the end of the seminar, I can answer some specific questions you may have about homeschooling if time permits. Okay.
Sure, Mataji. Thank you.
Yes. But basically, homeschooling is, it is also probably also it's legal in Canada, right? So there's a lot of support groups now in in America at least, and I'm sure there are some in Canada where you can take help from these support groups in terms of curriculum, where to buy the curriculum or how to teach and things like that. So because every country has its own rules and own things that you may have to follow. So try to get into that and see and develop the confidence. Oh, there's so many people you can, who are doing it, and this is that. In fact, they also meet together. They actually come together, and these children, they have field trips together and things like that. If you want to use that resource, it's there. It's all there. So this way you develop your confidence that, okay, my child is not going to suffer academically. And morally, spiritually, you cannot go wrong, right? So, that this way, that, okay, I'm on firm ground when it comes to academics. Okay, it may require a little bit sacrifice on the part of the parents because the children are not home. But for me, Prabhu, it was such an enjoyable experience, Homeschooling. In fact, when it finished, I was really missing it. I was thinking, how is my life going to go on now without homeschooling my children? It was such an enjoyable experience. But then I put my energy in helping others, which is very, very rewarding. So yeah, this is just a little bit of my own experience, but it's a very well tried out alternative form of education. It's nothing new, especially in developed countries like America and Canada. Is more and more people are doing it. However, yeah, so check into that and see. Okay. And I can answer some more questions later, perhaps.
Thank you, Mataji.
Okay.
Hare
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Mine is more of a reflection. It's always so nice to hear from you. I've heard from you at a few other seminars, and I have your books as well. And it's such a, beautiful and high standard. And for someone who's following it, you can think, well, it's not such a high standard. And every time I kind of feel a little bit, like I'm beginning in Krishna consciousness myself, because when I see that, wow, these are the standards, and I'm either not able to enforce them or I'm not following it, then I think, oh, what to do, and sometimes it can be this heavy weight, a big red X. Oh, I'm not doing this one. Oh, I'm not doing this one. But a few things that stuck out this time that, I think, well, I can insert more of this, or I really want to, really want to somehow support this, is that the adult association should mean more than the peers. And I see that with my oldest son now, that this thing of peers is really coming in, that like he would much rather be online or talking to his friends or something than hanging out with me, which is a change. And how can I change that? What activities can we do together to kind of really keep this this bond and this influence stronger? So that was a nice one. And then of course, always, making sure our we're feeding them prasadam and investing that time to cook. This is a hard one for me. And but you're right, these impressions and these deep, samskaras are so imprinted from just prasadam. So thank you very much for that inspiration.
Thank you. Yeah, so your first, I think it was like a question, right, in terms of how to increase that bond between you and your son, right? Because especially when they hit that age, then you can see there's more of the peer that's more important for them, and you kind of start, and you notice that you kind of start losing them at some point, right? The bonds that you had earlier, and you start realizing that, oh, it's weakening. So the way to do it, and a lot of it will be covered here in the section called Books Are the Basis, where you can develop that communication with your child and a very deep bond. For example, we can do so many things in our life, materially speaking, and people do that. Non-devotees do that, right? They go to movies together, or they go to bowling, or we have bowling is there together. Every one night they keep it for that, and so many things they try to do, realizing the importance of keeping that bond, right? So as devotees, we have to understand that even more powerful than the material bonds that we can take steps towards is the spiritual bond, that really is actually a factor in bringing our children closer to us. And the reason why we need to bring them closer to us, because the character development that they learn from their own parents and the close ones is a lot more, is stronger than what they can learn from outside. In other words, we affect our children much more deeply than what we think. Our own character, our own way we behave and things like that is much more powerful effect. In Gurukulas, as you know, ISKCON had some problems with Gurukula for some time. Now it's all coming back and everything is fine. But they noticed that children who had contact with their parents while they were in Gurukula, they did a lot better than those who were completely cut off, you see. So this communication that we have with the children is so important to keep that. And you may not realize it, and they may not realize it, but this is what they're gonna be most affected by. So and so the spiritual bonds that we have with the children, in other words, doing things together with them, spiritually speaking, reading Srimad-Bhagavatam that I'm going to be talking about, participating in different events in the temple, involving them in more activities in the temple is very, very important, because we will be part of that. We will be part of that, right? So practically, having things at home, doing a morning program or evening program at home, involving them in the temple, reading especially Shastra with them has a great effect on them. And I remember you also mentioned how you felt like a novice, because you were beginning as a devotee. I also, when I decided to teach them at home, I was a totally new devotee. I was reading Srimad-Bhagavatam with them for the first time when they were reading. We were running a preaching center and there was no time for anything to do my own study and things like that. So I was a very new devotee and I really didn't know what I was doing, really. But I had faith. The main thing, I had faith that the process that Prabhupada has given us is a wonderful process, and I wanted to try it. Okay. So Krishna consciousness is so wonderful that we actually grow with our children. As they advance spiritually, we also advance spiritually. And one day, Krishna will be so pleased for raising our children in a Krishna conscious way, that he will not only take our children back to God, but he'll take us along with it also as well. Okay.
Thank you.
Right. Okay, so if there's no questions, we'll move on to the next section of my presentation. And so Prabhupada, he wanted our children to read English and Sanskrit, two subjects, because he wanted them to read his books, English and Sanskrit. That was the books that was originally written in by Srila Prabhupada, right? And he wanted them to, especially to read Srimad-Bhagavatam. So I'm going to read to you these quotes, these wonderful quotes by Srila Prabhupada. And these are some of the very few of many such quotes, right? Our students specifically, they should take care of reading Srimad-Bhagavatam. We have therefore prescribed in our school Dallas. And from the very beginning, if they begin education with Bhagavad Gita and then come to Srimad-Bhagavatam and read the whole literature, then they will be more than MA PhD. Even astronomy, astrology, politics, sociology, atomic theory, everything is there. Therefore, if you study Srimad-Bhagavatam very carefully, then you will get all knowledge completely. Throughout the whole world, whatever knowledge is there is in the Srimad-Bhagavatam. If one simply reads the Srimad-Bhagavatam, his education is the topmost. If one studies Srimad-Bhagavatam, he is well versed in every subject matter. So Prabhupada is saying that Srimad-Bhagavatam has everything that one would want to know. All knowledge is in the Srimad-Bhagavatam. And when we study Srimad-Bhagavatam, we would need nothing else. So basically, when we train our children to study if we study Srimad-Bhagavatam with them, then they will get a good foundation. In what? In the Vedic perspective of everything. And so that when they do go out and they have to go to school or whatever way you're teaching, then because they would have established a good basis, a good foundation in the theistic way of life, then chances are that they won't be affected by everything which is atheistic or materialistic. Of course, we cannot wait for them to study the whole Srimad-Bhagavatam before they move on into life. No, we teach them as we go along. But at least by the time they go to college, they would be well versed in these subject matters from the Vedic perspective. And that is so important, right? Because we see today there's so much atheism and materialism, and that, of course, is not just the problem with the type of philosophy, but also it creates all types of problems, right? We become more and more entrenched into the bodily aspect of life thinking that we are these bodies. And that brings so much suffering in our life, right? And of course, when we develop this materialistic way of thinking, we lose some very good qualities, good character, right? And also we become, like Prabhupada said, less than a human being, basically. Because a human being has a responsibility, right? Has a responsibility. And the purpose of human form of life is actually to go back home, back to Godhead. So, so when we give them the study, they become very well situated. Now, of course, why Srimad-Bhagavatam? Why not other books, right? Of course, we should read as any book of Srila Prabhupada is good. The nice thing about Srimad-Bhagavatam is because it's easier for children. Why? Because it's in the form of stories, right? It's in the form of stories. Bhagavad Gita is a philosophy, but Srimad-Bhagavatam is the same philosophy, but in the form of stories. And that becomes very enjoyable for the children because they learn that philosophy in the form of stories, which becomes easier for them to digest. It becomes so much easier for them to digest. So let me go through some of these benefits from reading Srimad-Bhagavatam. So in other words, when they read these stories from Srimad-Bhagavatam, we know of wonderful stories such as Dhruva Maharaja's story section, and in the 4th canto, and Prahlada Maharaj in the 7th canto, plus so many more stories, right? Gajendra and the crocodile, the 9th canto, 8th canto. And then just about the entire Bhagavatam is so much full of these wonderful stories, right? We have the Jain Vijay story, how they were cursed by the 4 sages, so many lessons in that one. We have the Bharat Maharaj story with their 3 lives, his 3 lives, so many lessons in that. And then, of course, we have the wonderful story of Parikshit Maharaj and him being cursed to die in 7 days. So what is so wonderful about these stories is because the children, they develop good role models because they have such good role models to emulate, right? As we know, as I've already talked a little bit about that, the children learn by imitation. And when we put these wonderful role models, they learn from that. And these, by the way, they're not just mythological stories. These are absolute personalities. So when we read about them and Krishna, then they actually become reality for us. We imbibe these qualities, these character traits rub on us, on the children. And gradually, as they get older, they take the instructions more and more seriously, right? So there's direct association with such personalities. So in this way, there's so many things that character development happens through reading Srimad-Bhagavatam. Now, let me give you some examples, right? For example, we learned, like in the story of Dhruva Maharaj, the quality of gratefulness is so well shown in this story. Like how Dhruva Maharaj, in the end, when he was going back to the spiritual world by sitting in the airplane, he didn't want to step on the airplane. Why? Because he wanted to make sure that his mother went with him, right? Now, this is very unique. One would say, well, what's so special about that? Well, the reason why it's special is that he was given instruction of maybe a few minutes instruction by his mother to go find Krishna and to take shelter of him. And this happened 36,000 years ago, right? But he did not forget that due to his mother being the Padpadaksha Guru, he went on the right path. He found Krishna and his whole life changed. So he did not forget her. And he was so grateful to her. And of course, as you know, the story goes on where the Nanda and Sunanda, they pointed out to the airplane that was already flying in the sky, in which his mother was already sitting there. Because Krishna is so kind to his devotees. And he wants to make sure that every desire of his devotees is fulfilled. So in this way, the children learn the quality of gratefulness. Now, if we were to teach our children this quality by telling them that, look, I've done so much for you and you should be grateful to me, of course it's not going to make much effect. They're just going to hear from one ear and it's gone from the other ear, right? We cannot say these things to them, right? Because it doesn't have much effect. They may feel guilty for a little while, but then they forget, right? But learning through Shastra is so powerful, so powerful. And not just this quality, so many other stories deal with so many other qualities, right? The quality of humility in the story of Parikshit Maharaj. Now, in this one personality, we learn so many, imbibe so many qualities. Of course, the quality of humility. When he took the curse upon his head, he did not protest it. Everybody is fearful of one's death, right? And he had the power to reverse the curse. And all the citizens needed him. He had a duty towards them, yet he did not. He, in a very humble way, he took that curse upon his head. Yet, when he was king earlier, then he was such a powerful king. The qualities of leadership that he showed when dealing with Kali, his quality of compassion when he allowed the Kali to live, because Kali had surrendered to him. All these qualities in one person, and that to a king, a Rajrishi, right? Compassion, humility, good leadership, all these things are displayed in this quality. And as children, so Bhagavatam can be taught in layers. We cannot give everything at one go, but as the children read, they develop these, they learn in different layers. So many other stories, one after another, show different qualities, different things. I was thinking about that quality of, in the 10th canto of Kaliya, how Krishna dealt with Kaliya, talking about Krishna's own example of how he dealt with Kaliya. Kaliya was a really bad snake, right? And so he tried to pollute the waters, right? So in the end, of course, the story goes that after Krishna punished him enough, and he was actually going to kill him, but his wives came and pleaded on his behalf, right? And so he forgave him, but he asked him to leave immediately the waters of the Yamuna. And then when he left, he had no enmity towards him. In fact, he was feeling that, in fact, he gave him his position as king of the snakes in the Ramanaka island. In other words, it shows how Krishna had no ill will, even towards his enemy. Even towards somebody who had harmed him and his friends, which was such a great offense. Krishna had no enmity. Krishna was still so compassionate. So very deep lessons where we can learn that how we should not hate anybody. So these are the academic benefits from reading Srimad-Bhagavatam. And it's amazing how these benefits can actually equip a child to know those very things that we are trying to develop in order to make it into this world. Today, when employers who hire people, they're looking for these skills, right? In fact, when you go for an interview in the corporate world, what they're looking for, they will, instead of asking you questions and you answer them, but they are giving you a set of problems, and they are asking you, and they ask you how would you deal with those problems? And those problems require critical thinking skills. So instead of being like a straight interview with questions and answers, what they want to see in the future employees are these skills: strong reasoning abilities, critical thinking, communication skills, and good vocabulary. These are the very skills. They want to see whether the person can take a problem, they can take a problem, put it together, and find good solutions for it. In this way, the world today is looking for these skills. Even education, people in the education field who are interviewing students, they're looking for these skills. So these skills are clearly found in Srimad-Bhagavatam. They're clearly found. Because why? Because they evoke The nature of Bhagavatam is such that it evoke these skills. For example, just to the story of Parikshit Maharaj, so many questions have to be answered. And a child has to go deeper and deeper into the story in order to answer those questions. Now, for example, the story of Prahlada Maharaj, very powerful story, where we see that Prahlada is the greatest devotee that history has known, right? And Hiranyakashipu is the biggest demon, a terrorist or materialist, right? He's the biggest demon. But then how did Prahlada live in that situation? How was a devotee being able to actually survive in that situation, right? It's such a good example. That story is such a good example. And also, it also relates to, it gives us an inkling into what the material world is like. Today, we see the qualities of Hiranyakashipu. A lot of them we see in the world today, right? Prabhupada said that was only one Hiranyakashipu, but there's so many more now, right? And we see those qualities. So how to make sense of it? When we see these qualities in people, then we know that, when we study Srimad-Bhagavatam, then we understand, oh, well, I'm familiar with these things. I know that these qualities can exist, where people are very much, against peaceful life, where they're destroying, nature, environment, where, we see how today in the world today, how the environment is so polluted, the water is so polluted. Hiranyakashipu was doing the same thing. He was killing fruit trees. He, just out of his envy, he was killing them, right? It used to be that in India, where there would be fruit trees on both sides of the road. Now you don't see them anymore. It's not even there anymore. Where any person, if he's hungry, can go and get a fruit and eat it, right? And what to speak of the soil, how badly it is contaminated. The natural way of life is when the cow, interacts with Mother Earth in a natural way, where she gives her own cow manure to fertilize the earth. But when the earth is fertilized by these artificial things and is exploited, then this exploitation, even though it gives, it apparently may appear that it gives wealth, and prosperity, but Prabhupada said such prosperity is very short-lived. It does not last too long. So even though we see affluence in the world today, such affluence, which is based on exploitation, does not stay too long. Very soon it's going to go away. So these things we see in the nature of Hiranyakashipu, we can understand. Children are able to understand, okay, this is how material life is. This is how one can expect these things. But then how to deal with it is by the example of Prahlada Maharaj. So in other words, there may be negativity in the Bhagavatam, in terms of not, in terms of these nature of this material world, but there's always a positive side to it. And that's the wonderful thing about Bhagavatam. It puts things in perspective. Whereas children growing up just in the material world with this material, information, they are not able to have any hope. They're not able to see that this is how material life, but there's a way to live in this material world and be actually happy. Krishna consciousness is such a wonderful way to live in this material world, but also to be happy. There's a way to be happy here. And through the Srimad-Bhagavatam, we understand that. We understand how one can be happy. Of course, there's so many other things that we learn through Bhagavatam. It's through the ways of analogies, right? I don't know if you've noticed how Bhagavatam has so many analogies. For example, to understand the spiritual concept of the difference between body and soul, Prabhupada gives such a wonderful analogy of the car and the driver. How the driver is the soul and the car is the body. So even though the car, the body is there, but more important than the body is the soul. The driver is more important, whether he's in the car or not in the car. Right? So in this way, one time Prabhupada was talking to a reporter, and he took this analogy very, very deep. And he didn't give up till the reporter understood the difference between the body and soul. It was amazing. He said that how ISKCON, people don't understand the importance of ISKCON. Why? Because they don't understand that food for the soul is different from the food of the body. In other words, the car needs petrol, gas, right? But the driver cannot live on petrol. He has to have food. So if one understands that the soul needs different type of food than the body, then that is the value of ISKCON. Giving the people the understanding that more important than the body is the soul, and they have to feed the soul. So these analogies go a long way in helping the child understand the spiritual concepts, just like it's helping us. And as the child gets older, then he's able to go deeper and deeper into these analogies. And there are different types of analogies that help a child understand. For example, the concept of death is not easy for a child to understand. It's a difficult subject, right? But Prabhupada makes it very easy in many ways. First of all, through analogies. And the other one is through teaching, showing by contrast. Okay, there is things that feel very negative, but then there's positive things as well. For example, the analogy of the cat, catching a rat in his mouth and taking the rat to a place where he can eat it, and versus putting the kitten in his mouth. Now the rat is practically dying in fright, but the kitten is feeling very safe, right? So death is like that. For a devotee, it's not scary, it's not fearful, because he knows he's under the shelter of Krishna. But for a non-devotee, it is very scary. And that's why we have all these other things, we have the lower planetary systems, descriptions of that. And we have, of course, description of health, whereby we can explain to the children that these places are there for those who do not follow God's laws, right? Who are sinful, very, very sinful. And therefore they need to be reformed, right? And their mind has to be conditioned to a lower form of life. It's very difficult to go from a human consciousness you cannot go from a human consciousness to an animal consciousness. One has to be trained, conditioned, right? So these places are to be conditioned, are meant to be the conditioning. But a devotee does not have to fear. Why? Because there's stories like Dhruva Maharaj, where he's going into the plane, such a beautiful airplane, back to Krishna. So many wonderful stories of great devotees leaving to go back home, back to Godhead. Gajendra, the story of Gajendra. Krishna himself picks him up, puts him on, takes him away, right? Such beautiful stories. So Bhagavatam always puts things in perspective. Okay, there's this, but this is the nature of material life. We opted to be here. So how to make our life worthwhile while living here, and at the same time preparing to go back home, back to Godhead. And the problem is, like in the story of Hiranyakashipu, we saw that everything stems from his enmity towards God. So when a person is not God conscious, it's true that we cannot develop good qualities. It will be there. There will be some good qualities, but very soon, passion and ignorance will overcome it, because there's no pure goodness in this world. It's always tinged with some passion and ignorance, right? So therefore, one has to develop these pure traits by which one can overcome these three modes of material nature. So Hiranyakashipu, all his bad qualities came from his envy of Krishna. So when we are envious of God, we compete with him, then that's where all our problems begin, right? For that reason, he wanted to kill and finish all those things that were dear to Krishna and his devotees. And that is why it's so important to become Krishna conscious. Because the whole problem in life is lack of God consciousness. Just like Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati told Prabhupada, there's no problem in this world. When Prabhupada wanted to argue with him that it's more important to make India free from the British. At this point, this is more urgent. And he said, no, the only problem in the world today is lack of Krishna consciousness. That is the problem. So by giving our children a Krishna conscious education, we are giving them a formula to be happy. We're giving them the skills by which they can become happy. So if we really love our children, we have to give them this. This is being a real well-wisher. So yes, we have to train them to cope with the material world, to find a good job, to become good grahastas, take up that responsibility. All those things are there. But beyond that, the more important thing is to give them Krishna consciousness, because that is the panacea of all miseries, right? And Srimad-Bhagavatam clearly gives that. It gives us the tools by which we can become happy. So I will go through this methodology of teaching Srimad-Bhagavatam, the way I tried it, and many parents are doing it as well. If you have even 1 or 2 children, or we are doing it in a school situation, it's nice to first read through Prabhupada's books, actual Bhagavatam. So in other words, we can sit in a circle or in any way, and we give everyone a turn to read translations. Now, the reason why I don't recommend reading the purports is because children can get, it may become too long for them and they may lose attention. So what is recommended is that the parent or teacher can read the purports ahead of time. And they can jot down on the side, make a note of what they would like to, what they would like to discuss. Now, we don't have to discuss every purport or every point, because like I said, Bhagavatam can be taught in layers. So in other words, we just take those points that we feel very confident, our own confidence, initially, we feel, okay, this is where I can, and this is what's needed for children. You can also, knowing your child or knowing the children, you know what they need, right? Or what is good for them. So you can pick out some of those points and you can open it for discussion. Now, if you don't have the time to read all the purports, don't worry, just read it, read the translations, and you yourself will have a lot of discussion. Just by being an adult, you have so much experience in the world. If you cannot do all the purpose, read all the purpose ahead of time, you can read a few like that. So in other words, our discussion becomes very deep and meaningful in this way. Okay, and then discussion is very, very important. We understand what the discussion really sharpens the mind, actually. And now we see, and this which kind of started only 50 years ago, where school became a monologue. Yeah. So school became a monologue, right? Where the teacher talks and the students listen. This was not like that. It used to be a tutorial system. Education used to be a tutorial system, which means a teacher with a few students, a very personal atmosphere where there would be a lot of interaction. Even today, there are some very famous colleges like Cambridge and Oxford, where they have this tutorial system. And it's one of the best universities, right? So in this way, and the effect is a lot greater. Why? Because there's interaction. Discussion helps. And even Srimad-Bhagavatam was a type of discussion, right? The sages with Sutta Goswami. So discussion sharpens the intellect, it improves vocabulary and gives communication skills. So this is what we did growing up as children. You know, they interacted with me. We had discussion. We would study Srimad-Bhagavatam, you know, every day for 2 hours a day. You know, after the morning program, we would sit and read Srimad-Bhagavatam, and they developed a lot of their language skills through that. Of course, sometimes afterwards, after that part was completely over, then later on, I would give them some assignments, you know, some vocabulary words and questions and things like that. But really the basis is this. It's really this part, is the discussion orally, wherein we open their minds to open their minds in so many different areas. And very soon our discussion would take us into many different areas, you know, many topics in, you know, in what's going on in the world today, and our own problems, and, you know, problems that, you know, that we had to face in dealing in the temple. We were just openly speaking and talking about so many things in light of what the Srimad-Bhagavatam is telling us through the stories, because those things became more meaningful in this way. It's not just your word against mine. It's about what Prabhupada is saying, what Krishna is saying. So there was a basis for that. And then, of course, children now, it gets very exciting by now because their mind is just flowing, right? It's getting deeper and deeper, it's flowing. And so now they want to share. Of course, they are also speaking all along. There's interaction. And of course, we also should speak a lot in terms of what we have to offer them. And the reflection is when they actually, they speak out. They give their own realizations. And this used to be such a rewarding time for me, where I could actually hear from them what they've imbibed and some of the things that they've taken from that story. And they get a chance to speak their own reflections, right? So in this way, Srimad-Bhagavatam, it feels like something very simple, but actually has gone a long way. Such kind of mode of teaching has gone a long way in actually helping them develop good character and in helping them sharpen their intellect, as well as you know, gain a lot of very deep spiritual values. Okay. So this is, I'm going to go through very quickly. In others, Bhagavatam can be taught from very early on, when they're very little. And the way we do, of course, they cannot read, right? So what to do? They cannot read, but we show them pictures. We show them pictures and we explain those pictures. And they love it. And children like repetition, right? So you keep showing them those same pictures several times during the week. They love it. And they want to see more and more. And you discuss with them. So this is very nice. Like I said earlier, Krishna is absolute, his devotees are absolute. And therefore, these things go very deep in their hearts. Don't think this can come later. Let's do it now. And then, of course, the 4 and 5 year olds here. Now, these children are just starting to learn how to read. They're not quite there. So we read for them. But then we can read directly from Srila Prabhupada's books. We read our translations and we explain that story in our own way, you know, with expression. And we, you know, and so this way, and then we ask them questions. And we discuss with them the same process, except we're reading to them. And you'll be amazed how children that age, they go so deep and they can answer some challenging questions. How much they can, I remember I would sit with children that age for 45 minutes practically to an hour. And they would be completely immersed in it. So in this way, and also I have an experience, my own personal experience with my grandson about how deep it goes even for that age. He was right around between 4 and 5 at that time, and we were reading Srimad-Bhagavatam for several months. Sometimes when I had to go away, we were doing it on Skype, and it was amazing. When we were doing that Dhruva story, and that part came where as I mentioned earlier, the airplane came to take Dhruva back to Godhead, then it was such a beautiful description of the airplane, and Nanda and Sunanda sitting there. Everything was just so wonderful. My grandson said, Dadi, I want to go back I want to sit in that plane and go back to Godhead right now. And I thought, well, he's a little child and I didn't take him very seriously. And I said, yes, you can go one day. You just have to wait for that time. And then he said, no, but I want to go now. And I said, okay, if you want to go now, then your parents cannot go with you. Is that okay? And he thought for a minute and he said, well, I think I'm going to wait because I don't want to make the same mistake as Ajamal did. So I don't know if you know the story of Ajamal, but it's a story where he was raised as a very good Brahmin, but then he fell down with a prostitute. And for many, many years, he had her inside the house. He left his chaste wife and he brought her home and led a very, very sinful life. And then, of course, his youngest son, he had like 9 or 10 children, and youngest son was named Narayan. So when he was dying, he called out to Narayan affection for him. And when he chanted the name of Narayan, then Yamadutas, of course, had come to carry him to the hellish planets because he was so sinful. But then the Vishnu Dutas also came and they stopped him from going. They said, no, you can't take him. And of course, there's a wonderful conversation between the Vishnu Dutas and the Yamadutas. And Vishnu Dutas told them that the importance of chanting the holy name, that when one chants, then one is saved, at least from going to the hellish planets, and he gets another chance. And so in this way, when Ajamal came to his senses and he realized, my gosh, I'm getting another chance. He was lamenting and thinking, oh, I've been so sinful because I've left my chaste wife and neglected my old parents. So he's feeling so remorse how he had neglected them. And my grandson remembered that. And he thought, no, I have a responsibility towards them, so I can't do that. So, I mean, it was a very deep lesson that he picked up from the story. So even a small child that old, 4 and 5 years old, they can pick up. There's another Mataji who told me also another wonderful story that I don't think I have the time right here. So I'm going to move on here. Then this is the older children. And basically the process is the same, actually, because there is discussion and reflection. And of course, with an older child, it gets deeper and deeper. It gets deeper and deeper. And one can go into, especially with older children, even, all the way till 18, we can go into very topics, which is very good for them. For example, Grihastha life and topics like that, where we learn from very nice stories in the Bhagavatam. And how, like I said, Bhagavatam is taught by contrast, right? So there's wonderful description of good grihasthas, like Kardamuni and Devhuti, and of course also Prithu Maharaj and his wife Archie. So these are very good examples of good grihasthas. The basic principles are there, right? And then they are set in contrast with the bad grihastha life as well, right? For example, the story of Puranjan and his dealings with his wife Puranjani, and the effects of that, how they suffered. So this is put in contrast. And then of course, Prahlada Maharaj's description of Grihastha life. So when children read that and then they read these beautiful stories, they can put things into perspective, right? And they know that how, and then they open up about questions. I remember doing this I do many, many classes for young people, and I remember that with this teenage group, there were so many wonderful questions about when we're doing the Muni and the Bhuti story about, dealing with the opposite sex and how to deal with that, and, subject matters like that. And we were openly discussing that. Why? Because it was set in the perspective of the Bhagavatam story. It just becomes so much easier to discuss these topics when it's given from Bhagavatam, and set in that perspective, and of course the modern era and how to deal with that in today's age, But the principles are always there, for guidance, and also these principles never change. It's not like things, even the principles change. No, they never change. But of course, we have to adapt according to time, place, and circumstance.
Yes.
And of course, this is the story of Dhruva Maharaj, and some very deep questions that come out of it. Why did Suruchi suffer a heavy reaction, but the king did not? I'm hoping that all of you have read the story. For the interest of time, I'm not going to go into the story, but Suruchi was the stepmother who was very harsh towards, very mean towards Dhruva. And that sent him to the forest to find Krishna on the advice of his mother. And so Suruchi eventually, for being like that, she had to suffer a heavy reaction. She died in a forest fire. Her son also died. He was killed by the yakshas. But the king who allowed this to happen without protesting did not suffer such a heavy reaction. Why? And then Prabhupada talks in the pulpit about the concept of atonement, where the king was atoning for his mistake for a long time, for day and night, and he gave up his kingship, for that reason also. And so we discussed about the concept of saying sorry to somebody, when we do something wrong towards that person. We had such a nice discussion about being sorry and how to be sorry and how to feel empathize with the other person that we've harmed, So all these things we went and discussed, which is very relevant to them. Of course, quality of greatness. Now, a deeper aspect for older children is, why did King Sun... Oh, there was another one. Yeah, let me see. Even though Suniti was neglected by her husband, she was not the object of pity, but rather glorified as a great Vaishnavi. What can we learn from this? So in other words, even though she was neglected by her husband, she was not the favorite queen of the king, yet she became so glorious, because ultimately a person becomes glorious by the devotion to Krishna, right? That is our real glory, is to become devoted to Krishna. And how she changed a very unfortunate situation into a very fortunate situation. She took something which was so distressing, but she made it into something so wonderful. So like that, there's so many. Lord Chaitanya would read this stories of Dhruva and Prahlada hundreds of times. Why? Because of the lessons. Each time you read these stories like that, each time you're going to get newer and newer meanings from these stories. So wonderful there. So so it's not like, okay, I've already read it. No, each time you read. And I remember doing that with a group of children, and they were so shocked that this very story that they had read so many times, how deep they were, how deep these lessons were in this. Okay, so I'm going to stop here, and we may have to skip this part. I am not sure, but just, well, maybe just a little bit of this third part of the seminar. It's very important that we give our children the opportunity to give Krishna to others, basically. In other words, to teach Krishna to others. Sometimes we think that as children, as students, they simply have to study. But teaching is such a powerful way of learning. Because when we teach others, then the subject matter becomes very familiar to us. We become very confident. So when children give Krishna to others, then they become very strong in their own faith. They become very strong in their identity as devotees becomes very strong. Sometimes we see children, how when they're getting older, they start losing it, right? They become, as children, they were very Krishna conscious, but then as they get to be teenagers, they start losing it. So this is a very nice way to bring them back. In other words, to give them an opportunity to share Krishna with others. And what we did is that I would do school programs frequently, where we would go there and present Krishna consciousness to the classroom, to the school or classroom, and the children would get an opportunity. When they were little, they would get an opportunity to present, to chant or to explain their dress and things like that. And as they got older, they were able to give the philosophy to others, to actually give the presentation and field questions from them, and which becomes very challenging because then they're tested, right? Their own faith is tested. Of course, they prepare and go and they're all equipped like that. So it becomes a very powerful way for their own identity as devotees to become very strong. And of course, there's other ways to do it: Harinam, book distribution, temple programs, festivals. All these things increase their sense of identity and confidence as devotees. It also skills such as public speaking, marketing, debate, all these things become stronger. It's amazing, how much they learn through that. We are so worried about them, being, learn how to be in public, how to speak in public. These things automatically. Growing up in Krishna consciousness is such a, a rich experience, right? It's not like, there's no limit to what we can do. And these skills become part of our nature. They become part of us as we grow up in Krishna consciousness. Which child gets to develop these skills in schools? Very, very little chance, right? For example, I remember once a month we would do prison programs. I was taking my children to prisons to give Krishna consciousness to those prisoners. And it used to be such a powerful experience for them to see these very, very fallen people, taking to Krishna consciousness, seeing Lord Chaitanya's mercy firsthand. And plus they get to see what prison life is like. Surely they would not want to do any sinful things in their life, knowing that this is what one ends up with. It was both materially and spiritually, it was such a powerful experience for them. Now, these things are available to our children. Okay, these are the resources. Unfortunately, I don't have the 4th canto here, but we have 4 cantos of Srimad-Bhagavatam available on Amazon. And that's canto 1, 2, 3, and 4. And we're working on canto 5. If you have any questions, you can note down my email address. You can always write to me. I'll be happy to answer you. My first book was Homeschooling Krishna's Children, which provides all the tips and techniques on Krishna conscious parenting. Even whether you're homeschooling or not, it gives a nice basis for how to raise a child in Krishna consciousness. And that's also available on the web, on Amazon. And these Srimad-Bhagavatam books are very, I'm putting it together with a whole team of devotees where, and we've been working since many, many years to make this into a reality where we have all types of activities. It's a way to give Srimad-Bhagavatam to children, but in a fun way, so that it's easier for them to digest. There's a summary of the chapter. It's chapter by chapter. It's a systematic study of Srimad-Bhagavatam for our children, where we have a chapter summary, and then we have questions, higher thinking questions, and then we have many, many activities. For example, we have introspective activities, critical thinking activities, analogy activities, theater activities, a lot of fun things like crossword puzzles and word searches and things like that on every chapter. And the parents are around the world are kindly creating these resources to put it all together for our children. So if you're interested, so you can take advantage of that. I know Sham Mohini Mataji has ordered quite a few books already for the devotees. So this is the last of my slides. I'm going to stop here. Thank you very much, all of you, for being here with me and being so patient while I did this. Any questions? I'll open it for questions for a little while.
Okay, Hare Krishna,
Hare
Aruddha
Krishna,
Prabhu. Thank you so very much. I was trying to remember the point which you're raising. Actually, all the points are very relevant. So I have to go back and look at it again. to remember at least something which I want to, at my situation, to be able to use it and perhaps help others also to appreciate this. And it is, I was also wondering how you're going to use Srimad-Bhagavatam as the basis, because I thought it's pretty much for the adults to be able to understand, appreciate. But your approach and the way you presented is really so wonderful. Really, I wish I had this kind of education myself. So I'd be a much better person now by this time. So no, it's very practical, and you have put a lot of effort. So it's not only that you did it yourself, you're helping others around the world. I wouldn't be surprised it goes beyond ISKCON and even into a wider so-called Hindu community. I think that'll be also, I'll be really looking forward to that day, that it really penetrates, and perhaps even to others, because after all, the topic of spirituality is common for all human beings. So thank you again for spending your time with us this morning. So I will leave it for others to ask questions.
Yes, thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna again. I think the last part that stuck out is you're saying Krishna consciousness is so rich. And then, my realization was if we're practicing the hearing, the chanting, the associating with devotees, the preaching, and wow, prison, you took your children to prison preaching. And maybe you could just elaborate a little bit of, how you did that, and how you preached as a woman going into a prison and then with some children with you.
Well, my husband was there with me. Okay. No, my husband was there with me. So the times when he was not with me is during the school programs, because that generally happened while he was at work. And so I took them with me, and that's not very difficult, right? It's just a presentation where you follow a certain format, and I would kind of try to stick to that format where I would present a Krishna conscious life, not in the prison, but these are for the school programs, where I would cover, Hare Krishnas were well accepted in Boise, where I'm here, the preaching we would do and book distribution and temple work kind of made us part of that society here. Like we made a lot of effort to be well liked and accepted here. So like I said, it's a whole package. You have to do everything, like a little bit of everything. But that itself gives such a versatile life to our children, just doing those things, right? We also would go and do book tables and prasadam tables during events. So people gradually came to know you and say, wow, these people are okay, they're good people, like that. So all this helps in creating that atmosphere, which is very conducive for children, and also gives them things to do in their life, right? So I would prepare like a presentation which would cover, our dress, our lifestyle, what we do, and some philosophy like karma, reincarnation, and who is Krishna, and things like that. So it was a simple presentation, and then I would ask for questions, open it for questions. And it's so funny because when the questions were there, invariably the questions forced me to go deeper into it. Like people were so curious and so wanting to hear about Krishna consciousness. So, and then of course we would take books with us for the teachers and things like that. And we would also take like different items like a peacock feather, a peacock fan, and Bhagavad Gita, and all these things to show them how it's such a rich culture, like that. So, and then we would invite them to come to the temple. Gradually, a lot of groups started coming to the temple. I'm sure Toronto also probably does that. Many temples open the doors to outside groups for a tour. We were using the temple a lot as tours, as a tour place for schools and classrooms and university also. We were right next to the university. So the teachers would bring the students here to learn about comparative religion, right? So, but then they get a taste of Krishna consciousness because we would always chant, we would have prasadam, we talk about the philosophy. These three things were always there. And the chanting was so amazing that the chanting always brought them together, because chanting is so much, so uplifts, and music and instruments. So they always brought everything together. Any misgivings and the chanting would just, and prasadam, of course, would always bring things together, no matter what kind of group it is. It always helps. Like today, just today, there's a group coming, So in other words, so in this way, the children get a lot of opportunities to take part in different things, you see. And this way, they increase their love for Krishna consciousness and for to be devotees. So in this, and there we were doing book distribution because the college was very close. We'd go and distribute books like that, bring people to the temple, encourage them like that. Prison programs, we just got the idea. I think maybe we were inspired by somebody doing prison programs somewhere else in ISKCON. I don't quite remember, but you just have to go through the process of getting permission. That's all. And then you need you need special permission from them, because all prisons in America, at least, they allow other religions to come. They cannot stop you from doing that. So you can openly go and chant and talk philosophy to them. And I remember it used to be one of our most powerful times, where it was very exciting for our children. Yeah. Just basic things you cover and let them, mainly the chanting and dancing, and prasadam always did everything,
That's very exciting, very creative. And I guess as teachers, we always have to be so creative. And so you're just dovetailing all of these, school trips and these extracurriculars in Krishna consciousness. So that's very inspiring, very, very exciting. Thank you.
Hare Krishna Mataji, thank you very much. It's Adi Shyamdas.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Mataji, Dhanavad Pranam. Mataji, I really appreciate your effort and also inspiring so many us like me. And Mataji, I really appreciate that how you represented like Srimad-Bhagavatam to your kids and all of us actually, because I saw there are 4 volumes of Srimad-Bhagavatam also, because we consider Srimad-Bhagavatam as like very high philosophy, but the way you presented to it in a story form, right? Even like, all of us, even no matter it's no discrimination of any age, but everyone likes to hear stories. And, back home, when we're a child, it's like, it's a common part to have the stories at bedtime from from our grandpa and mother, grandfather and my grandmother. So yeah, that's a very interesting that how we should also even this higher philosophy with the simple story form and with the very simple meaning that really helps them to understand this. And the character that you have mentioned, that it's like Parikshit Maharaj and Bharat Maharaj and Prahlada Maharaj, and all these characters are really helpful there to build their characters, the kids' characters. So thank you so much, Mataji. I really appreciate, and you are really inspiring. And yes, and our ISKCON Mataji also mentioned about the rich culture that yes, many temples currently, you have done in very back, at least 30-40 years back. And then since we are so fortunate to be in ISKCON, that we have in so many temples, and even in Mayapur, 2-3 years back when I was in Mayapur, and to be part of, to have a tour in Gurukul. And it was like amazing to see how the kids were there, and like, the yagna, mandap and all sort of things. It was really inspiring that our kids, and how they are leaders in the future of ISKCON's future, right? So it was really, really helpful. So thank you so much, Mataji, for your time, and thank you very much, Guru Prasad Prabhu, for arranging this special lecture from Mataji. Hari Bol, Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu. Yeah, if we cannot send them to Gurukul, Prabhupada said that the parents can be the guru and the home can be the ashram, with some adjustments, of course. We cannot do it exactly like a Gurukula, right? So we should have a morning program. If they're going to school, that of course will become short, very short. And then we should, we should try to read Srimad-Bhagavatam with them. Try to encourage our children and sit with them, every day. Of course, even if your child is very small, I can see he's very tiny right now. So all those things are there. But that we can raise children at home in a way that's Prabhupada is pleased, so we don't need to. Yeah.
Actually, 2 years back when Kṛiṣhṇa Maharaj, he was here and with Shankar Prabhu's place, and at that time they were mentioning about Gopal Hari Prabhu's, that he used to come and travel with Guru Maharaj and then Narad Prabhu, and then they have like Srimad Bhagavatam verses. They are they are speaking all the slokas together and like that. So, it was very inspiring how the devotees in the initial years, that 30-40 years back, that how they taught and they trained the kids. So it was very inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you. Thank you for your kind words. Thank you. So, Guru Prasad Prabhu, should we end the seminar here?
I think so, because we are 5 minutes or 6 minutes after 12. Obviously, we're not getting any further questions. And perhaps it's a time to reflect on this, and perhaps should there be any question mentioned, they can actually forward the question to you by email. I also have your email, so they can contact me in case they didn't note it down. So
Yes,
I'll talk to them. So
thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, and hope to see you again and another time, perhaps maybe for a whole day seminar. If it leads to this, the interest actually somehow spreads around within our community, then maybe we'll approach you for a whole day seminar. Okay.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna devotees, for your presence and participation. Okay. Have a nice day and a nice weekend. Hari Bol.
Hari Bol.
Hare Krishna.